gone. He was wounded and all alone. As soon as it got dark, I went home to tell my mother, to ask her if he could give him shelter. She told me, if the Germans find the Englishmen here, they might kill us or burn down the house. I told her, Mother, I'm going to help him. And I got him and I brought him home with me.
For the Germans, the occupation of Crete was a very difficult exercise because they had to confront the idea that resistance was not confined to only men and even women, but also children.
A German with a machine gun, like this, comes and kicks me twice and I fall down. He spoke to me in German, but I didn't know German. I could not respond. He swung the machine gun like this and was hitting me here at the back. He thrashed the life out of me. I felt that my life was ebbing away. I thought about my children. Who would take care of them? When I got up, he kicks me 2 more times and he tells me, go away. I walked backwards with my hands raised. I didn't want him to shoot me in the back.
Everything was sad during the occupation. We had misery all the time, nothing but misery. All the possessions we had, our lives, and suddenly in an instant, everything was gone. No house, nothing to cover yourself, nothing to eat, nothing.
The most important thing it was, we had no guns, other than those that we had, that we took from the Germans, and some British guns and ammunitions. But that didn't stop us. It's an inherited thing for the Cretans. It's a hereditary thing. They are born fighters.
To some degree, it is not unusual that Crete produced so many great resistance leaders. For centuries, the Cretans had fought the Ottomans and other forces that tried to occupy the island. Leaders such as Banduvas and Petrakogiorgis emerged almost out of the pages of history. They had been there all along, and when the Germans came along, they were able to take up the gauntlet one more time and fight them.
Each area had a leader. One of the leaders was George Petrakogiorgis. Before the war, he was a merchant, well-respected and well-known. Immediately after the occupation, he formed the first group, armed guerrillas, and he started planning and fighting the Germans. He had no fear of the enemy. He was the most heroic man I have ever met.
I remember the resistance fighters my father led. They were true Cretans through and through. Tall, rugged, with ruddy, expressive faces, with a lot of humor even though the times were tragic.
The Cretans knew that the British were their allies. Men such as Petrakogiorgis immediately established contacts with the SOE, and they became the natural liaison with British intelligence.
Petrakogiorgis came in contact with the British officers as soon as they came to Crete. The British officers were well informed because Petrakogiorgis was a friend of the Prime Minister of Greece, Souderos, who now was in Egypt. So when the British came to Crete, they knew who to contact.
An indigenous population may have a will and a spirit to rise up and perform beyond any level that they could have ever thought possible. But sometimes it takes a spark. It takes a motivation to ignite that. And in the case of Crete, it was the British SOE willing to send in a few select, highly trained, highly capable operatives, and probably principal among them was Lee Fermor.
I was in Romania when the war broke out. I walked from Rotterdam to Constantinople just looking at things and writing books and things which I eventually published. And I had no military training at all, and I learned pretty fluent Greek. And so people like me were rather in demand. And so I was whisked off into intelligence.
When the British officers arrived, they joined us and helped us direct our various activities to a great extent. They placed radios in different locations which enabled them to provide information to the headquarters of the Allies of the Middle East.
The Cretans were passionate resistors and in on everything, full of ideas, and of course longing to get to grips with the Germans and get rid of them. That's what we were all hoping for. It wasn't some great triumphant day when we'd attack them and turn them out.
The villagers were the eyes and the ears of the resistance. The resistance, the Adartes, what we call guerrilla fighters, freedom fighters, were always up in the mountains. Men and women, all the populations were participants in this effort.
I started along with some other girls from Laku. We would gather food and supplies, and we would take them to the rebels. I had a pistol, 150 bullets on me, and 4 boxes of cigarettes. There was a German checkpoint where they knew me. They would ask me, "Calliope, where are you going?" I'd say, "Oh, I'm going to Furni to cut oranges." They let me go through. I felt the need to take part in the resistance with my uncle, with my brother. We did it with a lot of pleasure, with a lot of pride, because we were supporting our country.
My job was to take guns, bullets, and supplies, put them in a sack, and take them to the resistance group. I would usually go alone and find myself very close to German patrols. As soon as they turned, I would find the chance to sneak by.
I like to say it was almost romantic to get involved in the resistance. The younger children, they were so proud because, after all, they inherited that from their parents. The young people of Crete knew the dangers. They knew that the Germans were killing without asking.
One time, I was not so lucky. A German spotted me and confronted me with his machine gun. I had to surrender. They would beat me in the morning with a whip and then again in the afternoon. My legs, they were crossed and they would beat me. My flesh was black like a black cloth. This happened every day for 15 days straight.
For me, one of the most amazing things about the entire conflict was the involvement of children. There was an inherent sense of how crucial this time in history was, and that if there was ever going to be a future for the Isle of Crete, that everyone, to include the kids, had to be willing to risk their lives. I think that's profound.
The Germans were not expecting young kids to be field intelligence people, and that, of course, enabled the Cretans to be much more effective.
In July 1944, my leader, Petrakogiorgis, sent me to what is called Xerokabia. That area was the heaviest occupied and organized and armed in Crete, because I knew the area was up to me to select the location. There was an outpost, about 15, 20 people above the German camp, watching the Gulf of Messara. We were very, very excited, very eager. This was the time that we were coming down like eagles to attack our prey. After nightfall, we placed mines, road mines, 4 of them, with automatic weapons and hand grenades. We approached it slowly, right above the tent. We threw our hand grenades. We stood up and sprayed with our machine guns, and we escaped as fast as we could. Only the guard survived.
Guerrilla warfare by its very nature is brutal and extremely harsh, and it's a brutality that escalated as the occupation wore on. And unfortunately, the Germans, when they were captured by the Cretans, suffered the same fate as they meted out to the Cretan guerrilla fighters.
The prisoners we would take, often there was not a hospital nearby. No way to nurse them, no way to take care of them. After a fight near Damasianus, Bill Moss told me to execute our prisoners. What else could we do? I was not a man who could do such a thing. It was not in me. So I gave the instructions to Manolo Codocalo, who was a hard man, and told him to do it.
I think there is both an emotional and psychological factor to be considered with insurgency movements, and as they reach down deep inside and do the really hard things, they also extract an emotional and psychological toll on an enemy.
The Germans became increasingly brutal because they were so afraid of the Cretans. They saw Cretans behind every rock, every stone.
There was a funeral procession from Agios Mamas and Agios Yannis on the way to bury 2 that were executed by the Germans the previous day. They had a permit to go to the mountain, which they needed because it was a restricted area. A small squad of Germans came across the burial site during the funeral. The one who had the burial permit moved towards the Germans to show it to them. But as soon as the Germans realized they were outnumbered, they saw the freshly covered graves, and they got scared, and they shot everyone, including the priest. I remember seeing him lying there next to the grave, dead, and the Gospel and the Bible lying right next to him.
I was a witness at the execution in Mieres. They were all my friends. They were the cream of the crop. There was the banker, the treasurer, the mayor. The Germans had them dig a pit and tie them to a post in the center of it. And the teacher, who was the psalter for the church, started chanting hymns. He chanted the memorial services. He knew it by heart. Then he started singing our national anthem. And then the order was given to shoot.
In the case of Crete, there was this mythological proportion to what they did. But that doesn't do nearly as much justice as it does when the defeated forces themselves acknowledge the determination, the iron will of the people involved. The then commander of the German forces in Crete, General Alexander André, spoke about what he felt and what he saw as he witnessed this extraordinary show of determination, this quest for liberty that led the Cretans to sacrifice themselves. What Alexander André said, I think, is the most poignant of all. The courage of Cretans facing the firing squad is legendary. Cretans turn to mythical figures. They are so proud during their tragic moment of death that one can hardly fail to admire their courage. When executions were to take place, I would leave my desk and walk out to the balcony just to watch and admire those proud people. Nowhere else have I witnessed such defiance to death, such love for freedom, than on Crete.
German reprisals and executions only brutalized the population and encouraged them to commit more acts of resistance, creating a fertile ground for the SOE to supply weapons, grenades, mines, etc., to help the Cretan resistance expand dramatically.
Lee Fermor and the other relatively few SOE operatives who were in Crete were just as dedicated to the notion of freedom for Crete as the Cretans themselves were.
There were only half a dozen officers at the most, and with their wireless sets and operators. In a way, it was a terrific hardship. There wasn't much to eat, and they never let us go short.
We were very, very close. We were living together, eating the same food. They became one with us, dressing like us. Many of them could speak very good Greek. And we had a very, very close organization. They were receiving the messages through wireless services from Cairo, and we had messengers that would take the messages throughout the Crete.
We had very important information sent to Cairo, including information about convoys. The farmer would look at it and transfer it onto code, and he had the wireless operator and he would transmit them. One time I was searched because the Germans knew where the wireless was. I went through that direction and they suspected that I had something on me. And I had maps and drawings and information into the umbrella, my umbrella. And I left the umbrella down and they searched me, they searched my shoes. And then I picked up the umbrella and I walked away.
We were in constant communication. We were in different caves, but we used to meet every month or so and confer. And the extraordinary thing was, although we were in touch with headquarters, which is in Ruston Buildings in Cairo, we were left very free to do what we want.
The farmer was a very enthusiastic person. He really was an amazing character. I always admired them for his courage, and I tried to imitate them. He would stop the Germans to ask for light for his cigarette. In the meantime, he would pick up the chair to see what the insignias they had, where they belonged, even ask them questions sometimes.
The amazing thing about these British intelligence officers was they had the joy of living in them. We fought together, we lived together, and we died together.
One day, Lee Fermor and I were sitting together, having some coffee, and a group of Germans came up to us. They were looking for men to work on a forced labor project. They captured Fermor and took him to the airfield to work all day. He came back later that evening and said, "I saw and learned everything. I have never met another character as strong as him, neither Greek or English."
The first order of business for the German paratroopers in Operation Mercury was to seize three vitally important airfields, Castells, Balame, and Heraklion, because they had to be able to supply themselves as they occupied Crete, and it was absolutely vital that the SOE operatives enlist the support of the resistance fighters to take those airfields back.
The saboteurs went and placed the bombs, which they had made plastic bombs, onto the planes and onto the gasoline. And then a German came towards me and I gave signals with the flashlight and the saboteurs came. And we ran probably like, I don't know, a third of a mile or so, and then we stopped. And by that time, the explosion started and barrels of gasoline thrown up in the air and exploded. It was beautiful.
Acts of sabotage and espionage, of course, were the primary focus of the resistance and the SOE activities in Crete. However, they could not avoid direct confrontation with the German units on the ground, and occasionally there were firefights between the Germans and Cretan guerrillas.
It was Friday the 13th, August the 13th, 1943. We received Holy Communion. We got up always early in the morning, and one of the adults, George Balaskas, told us, I had a dream, and before the sunrise, some very bad things going to happen to us. So about that time, the night guard, whose name is Psarokostas, arrived and told us the village of Orisa is surrounded.
There was a little road that they would go through Trahili, then go to Luva. We could see the Germans going up there from down in the village. The Germans were going up there like a rope.
It was almost daylight. We looked up to the mountain, and sure enough, we saw the top of the mountain, Germans walking back and forth. And at that time, the Germans fired in the air a machine gun, a warning. Balaskas saw the man with the machine gun. With one shot, Balaska killed him. As I was dashing forward, Selekos ran and tell us, I'm wounded. And he collapsed. He just turned his head and expired. Petrakogiorgis raised his rifle and he said, "Apano done palikaria mu, thanatos si varvarus," which means, on them, death to the barbarians. And we attacked them from all directions. They hit this high ground. They should have killed every one of us. The Germans were about 400, but because of the command that Petrakogiorgis gave, we just, like wild animals, attacked them. At that time, we pushed all directions, to the right, to the left, and forward.
I saw a German to my right and began to shoot. He tried to hide, and I aimed and I shot him and he fell. Then I went up to him and shot him again to make sure he was dead, and he was. The Germans were confused in the mountains. The Germans in the mountains were nothing.
I remember, see one German, he threw his backpack and his gun and running like a wild goat. Although we were only 18, they had no idea how many we were. I have the feeling that they thought behind every tree was a gorilla.
The Germans held every advantage. They had the high ground. They should have been able to destroy the small Cretan band, but the reverse happened. The Cretans managed to put over 400 German troops to flight. The resistance in Crete grew rapidly, much more rapidly than the Germans had anticipated. The German High Command placed the blame of having such a growing resistance against the commandant, General Andre, who was relieved. He was replaced by General Müller, who was notorious as a very heavy-handed man who imposed a great deal of brutality on the island during his tenure as commandant.
He had killed many, many people all over in Crete, burned a lot of villages, and he created a fear during that time, in 1943.
They destroyed my village. Nothing had escaped that day. They used gasoline and set everything on fire. The houses, the people, and one person who was handicapped, he was burned alive inside his house.
They killed 6 kids from a village called Arkadi. The youngest was 12, the oldest 18. They had executed them. 6 kids. 2 were brothers. My sister's youngster, who was 9 years old, was machine gunned by the Germans. Is that not a terrible thing? My sister's child?
They killed anyone they caught. They had even placed mines in the village square. They destroyed everything. We gathered the bodies and put them in tents by the river. We counted 10 groups of tents. A total of 108 were executed that day. You can't begin to imagine what happened. Such gruesome things. The human mind cannot grasp the disaster that happened there.
I was there in the village of Margaritari with Pătrăcogheorghis to pick up supplies. The Germans surrounded the village and we had not realized what had happened. I ran down a ravine. I saw 2 or 3 Germans raising their machine guns toward me. I got scared and I raised my hands. They took me and other prisoners to a warehouse in Mirs. The Germans started interrogating us.
Schubert came and had me searched and found scissors on me that belonged to a doctor. They cut my fingers so that I would talk and give information. Where is Pătrăcogheorghi and where are the others? They would ask. We're going to let your blood run until you talk. One person had a revolver at my chest, and after a while he started hitting me on the head with the butt of the gun. I did not open my mouth. They learned nothing from me.